Well, we've made it to the group stages of the 2024-2025 African Champions League. Who are the favorites? Who do we have the most questions about? Who are our biggest surprises? That's all coming up next on this episode of the African Football Roundup. Welcome to another episode of the African Football Roundup. I'm your host. My name is Meher Mizahi, and this podcast, as always, is brought to you by africasaCountry.com. We are back from our yearly publishing break at africasaCountry.com, and we do have some great articles up on the website that I'd recommend you go and check out. One of them, for example, is From Niger to Abidjan by Aud Konan, and she speaks about the Nigerian diaspora in Cote d'Ivoire. We also have an article by Elizabeth Cooper and Gitonga Wanda called The Freedom to Move, and they discuss the political challenges of hiking if you're Kenyan. But without further ado, let's dig into this episode. We're going to be discussing the CAF Champions League, my favorite club competition. I'm sure if you're watching this episode on YouTube or if you're listening, on any of the audio platforms, this is probably one of your favorite club competitions as well. And so we're going to be talking about the teams that have qualified, and from there we're going to parse them into categories. And I think we're going to start with the favorites because they're pretty obvious. Um, in taking into account my criteria, for me, the favorites are clubs that have performed at a high level, have had stability, and have provided or have managed to procure good reinforcements. So if I asked any of you really, or anybody on the street, who are the favorites of the African Champions League this season, I think everybody would say El Ahli, and everybody would of course be right. Excuse me. So when we talk about Al Ahli, one thing that I've spoken about on this channel before is that part of their advantage, yes, it's the quality of player. Yes, it's the budget that they have. Yes, it's the home atmosphere that their fans can sort of generate. But also, especially, it's the mentality. And when I say mentality, I mean not just the mentality of the players, not just the mentality of the coaches, not just the mentality of the board, even the mentality of the fans. Everybody wants to win everything, and there is no excuse for not winning everything. And that's what I found most incredible whenever I speak to Al Ahli supporters or players or coaches or anything of the sort. For them, as they say, as a famous North American football coach says, the standard is the standard. And so teams know what is needed to win the title. To win the title, you're going to have to beat Al Ahli. They are the standard. And I thought at the end of, I remember walking out of the final in Radis in Tunis and speaking to Al Ahly supporters, and I asked several of them, do you think there's going to be a big shakeup? How long are you guys going to be able to maintain this team? Because me personally, I thought that they wouldn't be able to retain all of their players. I thought maybe Percy Tau was unhappy with how much uh, time he was given, the role he was playing. Maybe he wanted new challenge. I thought Mohamed Abdel Munem, their center half, would leave because he's one of the best defenders on the African continent. He's young, ambitious. Perhaps he'd want to move to Europe or the Middle East. I thought perhaps their goalkeeper, Mohamed Shinawi, same thing, nothing to prove. There was a really great goalkeeper behind him that helped Al Ahly win the CAF Champions League. So I thought perhaps he would move on. Ali Ma'loul suffered an torn Achilles tendon. I don't know if Al Ahly were going to stick by him. Anthony Modeste would be gone. So I really thought there would be a huge shakeup in terms of, the squad, the first team squad. But almost all Ahly fans that I asked were like, no, I don't really think so. And when I would bring up these individual cases, they'll say yes, but yes, but yes, but. And to be fair, they were right. There's only been two big departures from this squad at Al Ahly. You have Mohamed Abdel Monem, who we spoke about, probably the best defender playing on the African continent over the last 3-4 years. He ever since he broke out at the 2021 AFCON, which of course took place in 2022. Um, I think since then he's been one of the best defenders on the African continent. And this summer he got his move to Nice. And actually, last weekend, this is why we didn't record a podcast last weekend. I was in Marseille recording a mini documentary about the connections between the African continent and l'Olympique de Marseille. And so I got to watch him in his debut, Marseille versus Nice, fresh out of the international break. And to be fair, it wasn't his best match, but it was great to see him out on the pitch. I was so proud of him. I felt like he was like my little brother or something, like just because I've been watching him so long on the African continent and now we're there or in Europe, and I was really, really proud of him. I think he's going to do well at Nice. I think they believe in him, and I think he's going to have a successful career there. So Mohamed Abdul Mun'im leaves Al Ahli, and their central defensive midfielder, their Malian destroyer in midfield, Aliou Dieng. Aliou Dieng is a player that reminds me of N'Golo Kante because it's like one of those players. It's almost like a very powerful suction or a vacuum or something. If the ball is loose, if you don't have it under tight control, and you're within a meter, maybe 2 meters away from him, he's gonna find a way to nick it off of you. Yes, his passing or his technical ability is not the greatest, but he's such a useful asset in midfield. And Aliou Dieng got his move to the Middle East. He got paid, and so he left. Anthony Modeste was released. That's not a big, deal because he wasn't really playing up to standard. Ahmed Abdul Qadir, a winger, a useful winger, also left. And this year, I don't think we're going to be relying on the left back Ali Ma'loul. So, to recap, very important players that were lost: a midfielder, a central defender, and a left back Ali Ma'loul to injury. What Al Ahli did is they replaced Ali Ma'loul with Yahya Atiyatullah. Yahya Atiyatullah is a player that has incredible experience. He has won a CAF Champions League with Wydad Casablanca. He has played, in huge matches at the FIFA World Cup with the Moroccan national team, as Nusayr Mazraoui, the current Manchester United right back, who was playing left back for Morocco because they have Ashraf Hakimi. He was injured during the World Cup, and Yahya Atiyatullah came in. Nobody really expected that much from him, and he was fantastic. And so he's a player that's proven himself. He was playing in Eastern Europe, and Al Ahli came in and they brought him to replace Ali Ma'loul. So one North African left back from the Maghreb replaces another, and I think it's one that can be up to standard. Ali Ma'loul set the standard very high, but there won't be much of a drop off with Yahya Atiyatullah, the Moroccan left back. So he's replaced. What about who else did they replace? Did they bring in anybody else? Not really. Instead, players that have been in reserve have been stepping up. So Mohamed Abdel Mun'im goes to Nice in France. Rami Rabia, the Al Ahli center half, who was playing last season, he's been stepping up and been very important. So far in the CAF Champions League qualifying, he scored goals against Gor Mahia in the first leg and the second leg, being that set piece threat that Mohamed Abdel Mun'im was, and being a rock solid in defense as well. Rami Rabia was always highly rated as well since he was 1920. He never hit the ceilings or the heights of Mohamed Abdel Mun'im, but he's stepping up and filling his shoes quite well. And they have Yasser Ibrahim and they have other center halves that can be good enough, in my opinion, for Al Ahli. And in midfield, they're just going to keep, that midfield trio of Marwan Atiyah, Akram Tawfiq, who at times I think was more of a right back or a full back. As Mohamed Hani has settled, solidified his place as a right back, he's going to be moving into midfield, and he was really great as he recovered from injury last year in the latter stages of the CAF Champions League. So you have Marwan Atiyah, you have Akram Tawfiq, and you have Imam Ashur. You don't really need another midfielder. You have other midfielders on the bench, but you don't really need another one. So they didn't have to go out and spend crazy cash, but they did kind of promote from within, and they brought in Yahya Atiyatullah. And so yeah, Al Ahli they keep winning. They're going to keep winning. They just celebrated the league title of last year, as most European leagues are 6-7 matches in because the Egyptian Premier League always gets delayed. So they had this great tifo, and you could see that the fans really appreciated this iteration of the team. They did a huge choreography of the players with the coach, and it was really heartwarming to see. And I think they're going to be the favorites again because of the stability within the squad. They kept Marcel Koller as the first team manager, and most importantly, they keep the same expectations. There's one other club that I'm going to have in my favorites, and this isn't really, again, that much of a shock because they were the finalists, Esperance de Tunis. So I kind of feel cheaps doing this, like the favorites are the finalists from last year, but they also managed to keep the stability. They kept the same first team squad practically. Not exactly, but they kept the coach and they kept the vision and they kept the most important players. So they won their qualifying matches 12-1 on aggregate, sorry. Yes, they beat a team from Somalia, Dekadaha, who's never seen them in this competition before, so the expectations were not that high. But still, the recruits that they've managed to bring in makes me think that they're very ambitious this year, and they have a bullseye on Al Ahli, and they also have an eye on the Club World Cup next summer in the United States of America. The only worrying departure that I have for Esperance Tunis is Ghailan Shalali. He has spent a total of 10 years at Esperance Tunis, has more than 150 league appearances, 30 caps with the Tunisian national team. Very strong, wiry, tall midfielder, all action, can do that box to box role. And he goes to Al Ahli Tripoli, and there's lots of cash in the Libyan league at the moment. Maybe that's something that I'm going to talk about in the future. But he's replaced by Larry Azouni, who's also a Tunisian international, has 10 caps with the Tunisian national team, and has European experience. So, not too much of a drop off there. They also replaced two of last year's wingers, Andre Boukia from Congo and Hussam Rasha from Algeria. They were good players, but they were not performing up to the standard that Esperance de Tunis needs. Historically, when Esperance de Tunis won the CAF Champions League, they won it with Youssef Msakni as a left winger, Youssef Belaili as a left winger. Their wingers have always been almost world class. And last year they had the Brazilian Jan Sass play at that level, but they didn't really have anybody on the left wing play at that level. Hussam Rasha at a certain point was very industrious. He was working very hard, tracking back, fulfilling a great defensive role, but he was not having the attacking output that you would need from that position. And so what did they do? They brought back the Algerian crazy man, Youssef Belaidi. And Youssef Belaidi, as the last time they won the African Champions League, he was in the squad and he practically dragged them to the African Champions League. And it's a love story between him and this club. Um, it kind of reminds me of like, okay, I'm gonna exaggerate a little bit, but Diego Maradona at Napoli. It's like a club in the city that understands that this player is flawed. He's supremely talented, but he's flawed. But we love him and he loves us, and here he's safe and he's gonna take us places. You understand the dynamic, Youssef Belaidi last season was at MC of Algiers, and he was the best player in the Algerian league. He helped them to their first league title in over 15 years. Everybody in Algeria was expecting Youssef Belaili to stay at MC of Algiers and to help them back into the Champions League and to help them mount a real challenge to Al Ahli, to Esperance de Tunis. But no, he decided to go to Esperance de Tunis, not on that much of a salary raise, really. But instead, I think what he had in the back of his mind was the Club World Cup in the summer. MC of Algiers won't be playing in that tournament. Esperance de Tunis will be playing in that tournament, and so I think he was quite keen to play in that tournament, and that's why he decided to move to Esperance de Tunis. Um, but that's not their only signing this summer. They also brought in the South African winger, who has also been capped with the South African national team, Elias Mokwana, a player that I watched in the March transfer window, the March international window against, I believe, Andorra and Algeria. There was Bolivia, Andorra, Algeria. I think against Andorra and Algeria. I watched him play in both of those matches. I think Andorra and Algeria, he was fantastic. He was really, really good. And I think he's been an important player in the PSL over the last year or two. So that's another great signing. They also signed a young Ivorian midfielder, 19 years old, Abdurrahman Konate, who is, if you listen to Ivorians, one of the hottest talents out of Cote d'Ivoire, player that will be playing in Europe 2 years from now. They brought in a experienced, level-headed left back named Ayman bin Mohammed, who was with them the last time they won the African Champions League as well, with Youssef Belaili. Left back, he's half Tunisian, half Irish, but he plays for the Tunisian national team. And he was playing in France, I believe, in the second division. He's back. They brought in international goalkeeper as a backup to their star 19-year-old, or maybe he's 20 now, Amanullah Memish. They're a very young, very good goalkeeper. They brought in Bashir bin Said, the number 2 for the Tunisian national team, to back him up for Esperance de Tunis. And this is the second year for head coach Miguel Cardozo. Last year he came in, he was parachuted in the middle of the year. He had to put in place survival tactics where they were not being offensive at all. If you remember those matches against Mamelodi Sundowns, they were just being negative, shutting down any spaces and trying to score on the counterattack, which they obviously managed to do in the semifinals. But now that Miguel Cardozo is in his second year, I think we're going to see a much more ambitious, a much more expansive Esperance de Tunis. Jan Sass, the Brazilian, is also in his second year. Rodrigo Rodriguez apparently wanted to leave the club, but he hasn't been able to secure a move, so he's going to be back. The striker, the number 9 for Esperance de Tunis. How motivated will he be since he wanted to leave the club? That's one question that we have to keep an eye on. But overall, when I see that they brought back, practically 80 to 90% of their squad, the players that left were replaced with even better players, and it's the second year for the coach. Me personally, I think Esperance Tunis they have a bullseye on Al Ahly, and I think they're going to be gunning for that CAF Champions League title, especially since the Casablanca isn't here. I think this is the season for Esperance Tunis to really, really mount a challenge. So those are my two favorites, Al Ahly and Esperance Tunis. Who do we have question marks about? Who are we unsure about? I have two clubs here. And my criteria, my criteria for the favorites was stability and reinforcements, my criteria for putting these clubs as question marks is really instability. And you're gonna guess that my one of the clubs I have the most questions about is Mamelodi Sundowns. I think this is the biggest question in the CAF Champions League is what is Mamelodi Sundowns in the post Rolani Mokwena era? Rolani Mokwena, to be fair, I think he's probably the person that I've spoken the most about on this podcast, because he's such a fascinating figure, right? We know that he's the most tactically advanced coach um, in Africa. We know that he's incredibly intelligent, ambitious, very well spoken, very likable. But we've also had questions, about like the ability for him to get his squad to not make mental mistakes at the highest level, for example. Because, in North America, again, going back to saying that they have North American football, they say you're either coaching the problem or you're allowing the problem to fester. You, as the coach, the buck stops with you. All of the blame comes back to you. So you're either coaching these mental mistakes, or you're allowing them to happen. Um, and so that, again, I don't know if that's fair, but that was a sort of criticism we had of Mokwena last season was you dominated Esperance Tunis. You were not creating any chances, and they ended up scoring on a goal kick. I think that was two or three touches, and it was in the back of the net 6 seconds later. So what's the point of doing all these sophisticated things if in the end that's going to be the result and that's going to be the determining factor of the match? Excuse me. So Rolani Mokwena goes. I think it was a shock for everybody. He moves to Wydad Casablanca, who are not in the Champions League this year, and um, there were rumors about why he wanted to leave. Some people say he didn't get to bring in the recruits that he wanted to. Some people say, he didn't get along with the rest of, like the board above him. Some people called him arrogant. Some people called him controlling. But I think overall, most Sundown supporters wanted him to stay, and they were sad to see him go. And the coach that takes over, I'm going to try to pronounce his name correctly. I don't think I'll be able to do it. Unfortunately, I'm much too basic with my linguistics, but it's Manquba Minkriti. Uh, and he was initially the co-coach or the co-mentor alongside Rolani Mokwena when Sundowns brought him in, the one brought the former in. But Mokwena eventually took over and he was sort of set aside, and now he's back and he's in full control. The first thing he did, cleaned house, because Sundowns had a squad of I think up to 40 players, which is a ridiculous thing. They're kind of like the Chelsea of African football. Too many players on the books, and he sort of lets go of 14 of them. Either sends them out on loan, cuts them, gets rid of them, sells them, whatever. He brings in two center forwards, which was a very big need for Mamelodi Sundowns. One of them, Arthur Salis, $3 million, huge investment. Proven track record in the Belgian league with Lommel, which is a club that's known for developing young talent. He's only, I believe, 21 or 22 years old. Brazilian tall, long striker that's technically proficient, good in the air, and that I think will be, if he manages to adapt well, mentally, culturally, will be a very important player from Mamelodi Sundowns. And they also brought in Ikram Rainers, who's a proven commodity in the PSL. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I do think he led the PSL in scoring last year. He had 15 goals in 28 matches. And so, again, if I'm not mistaken, I even think that he was one of the players that Rolani Mokwena had outlined as a transfer target and wanted to bring in the January window. I think there was a rift between him and the board because he didn't manage to secure a striker in that January window. So Sundowns, they go ahead and they make the moves that maybe Mokwena wanted to make in January. And that was, that fulfills a big need for them. They needed that target man. They needed that striker. Um, but so initially, I explain all of this. They get rid of the dead weight. They bring in, very talented strikers. You think, okay, so they're making positive moves post Mokwena. However, Sundowns, if you look at the last few weeks, have crashed out of the MTN 8 in the semifinals against Stellenbosch. And they haven't had a lot of serenity within the squad. So Coach Mankoba, I'm gonna struggle with this one. I'm gonna need to bring on some South African friends to teach me. But Coach has been he's discarded two of the players, Kuliso Mudau, Teboho Mokoena, two very important players, not just for the South African national team, but also for Mamelodi Sundowns. Discards them, doesn't really play them, calls himself a big boy in the press conferences. He says he's not emotional. He says he's gonna have to, manage this big squad. And it seems like there's a lot of tension between the players and the coach. Maybe he didn't start them, and they feel like he has an agenda against them because they were, favorites of Rolani Mukwena's. Or maybe he feels like they didn't really take to him immediately, and so he set them aside. And as a result, my biggest question here, so you have stability at the head coaching level. The squad has been fairly stable. I like the additions, but you have instability at the coaching level. And my biggest question here is, will the players buy into what the coach is selling? Because when you're coaching 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, and you say, I'm the big man, you're on the bench, you have to follow what I say, that can work. But out of my experience, observing football over the last 10, 20 years, when you try to take that approach with players that have had success, players from Al Ahli, players from Mamelodi Sundowns, players from, Esperance de Tunis, players that have accomplished things with their national team and at the club level, and you try to, you know, alpha them, like they say, that can backfire on you. These players, they have kids. Some of them are over the age of 30. They have money in the bank. They have a lot of pride. They have ego. And so they won't necessarily accept that. So my question is, will they follow new coach in his system, in his modus operandi, in his way of doing things? I don't know. But the results in the MTN8 were not they were not encouraging. And that's something to keep an eye on. Another team that I think is interesting but that has had a lot of instability is TP Mazembe. So they kept, unlike Mamelodi Sundowns, they kept their head coach Lamine Ndiaye, who we spoke about last year. Remember, he's the one that took TP Mazembe to the final of the Club World Cup. And he usually, defends very well. If you look at the amount of goals they conceded last year, it was very low. And all the teams that defended well went far in that tournament, except for maybe the Angolan club, Primeiro de Agosto. Or no, was it Petro Atletico? I think it was Petro de Luanda. And so, anyways, where they do have instability is their squad. They didn't manage to keep a lot of their players. So they lost Joel Beya, the man, I believe he's from actually Lubumbashi in DRC. He goes to Force Armée Royale, ASFAR, the army team from Morocco, who's going to be in the CAF Champions League as well. And I think he even scored a goal in the Champions League qualifying matches. They lose Philippe Kinzumbi, number 7, very interesting winger, left-footed, plays on the right wing, creative spark from midfield. They lose him to Club Africa in Tunisia. They lose Glody Likonza, who was their sort of box-to-box midfielder, the player that's going to be trailing and getting into the box and scoring a lot of goals. He would, usually average around, 7 to 10 goals per year. So I like those midfielders that provide, goals time and time again. Think about, like a Frank Lampard, a Dele Alli when in his prime, things like that. He goes to USM of Algiers, as does their former captain, the defender Kevin Mondeko, really big bruising center half. And so they were raided by North African clubs. USM of Algiers took 2, Club Africain 1, and ASFAR 1. Now, they didn't really have a huge recruiting strategy in replacing those players. Again, they're going to be relying on their young bucks. Players like Oscar Kabwit, very, very good winger, only 19 years old. In my opinion, I made a video last year, 5 young players to keep an eye on in the CAF Champions League. He was one of those names. He will be one of those names again this year. I think he's absolutely dynamic. I haven't seen a winger like this at Mozambique since Isaac Chibangu. Cheikh Fofana from Mali, again, another winger, but a taller one that's almost more of an auxiliary striker that's really good on getting on the end of crosses. He had very important goals last year as well. Fili Traore, another Malian. Pashant Mwamba in midfield. Ibrahima Keita, the Mauritanian right back, very, very good as well. And the goalkeeper, Senegalese goalkeeper Ali Ufati. These are the young players that the squad is going to be built around. Will these young players, will they be able to step up and perform at a high level in a semifinal match, in a quarterfinal match, Not when they're playing in Lubumbashi, when they're playing in Kaza, when they're playing in Algiers, when they're playing in Cairo, when they're playing, elsewhere. That's what I don't know, and that's why I have a big question mark about TP Mazembe. But I was impressed with their matches against Red Arrows, and you could see that it was a similar style as last year. They didn't concede a lot of goals, even though they conceded a lot of chances. Last year, I swear to God, they conceded. You would think that with the chances they conceded, if you look at their XG against, it was probably 2 to 3 to 4 per match, but the ball would never go in. And that's why some people when they believe in juju, I kind of understand. It's like how does that work? Like, and they're so erratic. And on the other hand, they create a lot of chances, but they don't score as well. They didn't score that many as well. So it was similar with the Red Arrows match where they could have conceded 4 or 5 goals, but they end up conceding 1 goal over 2 legs, and they end up scoring 4 goals, I believe, over the 2 legs as well. But they could have scored 6 or 7. So it looks like it's going to be the same thing. Very energetic, very athletic team, up and down, creating a lot of opportunities. Very entertaining to watch, but that kind of the lack of discipline, especially in their own defensive third, will ultimately be their undoing. But I do wonder about the instability of losing some of those players, some of your best players, your former captain, experienced players like Godi Lekonza to North African clubs. Uh, we've been going on for a long period of time now. Let's finish with two clubs that are unknown or that are going to be surprises. Let's say the two biggest surprises. Clubs that I think nobody's going to outline as potential winners, but I think will surprise people. And my criteria here is either they're new to the CAF Champions League, they haven't been here in a long time, or the players are unknown. So the newcomers are Mouloudia of Algiers, MC of Algiers, the club that I spoke about with Youssef Belaili. They beat US Monastir from Tunisia, a very controversial match. Lots of fights on the pitch. One supporter died. There was lots of clashes with the security forces in Algeria. But I do think they're the most interesting newcomers in the CAF Champions League. Why? They are owned and run by Sonatrach. Sonatrach is the biggest company in Algeria. It's the biggest company in Africa in terms of total income. Um, that doesn't always translate to the biggest budget in Africa, but recently, in the last 2 years, they've shown a political willingness to spend a lot of money. Um, so, for example, they're really the only club in Algeria that have, like not only their own stadium now, which they inaugurated in the match against US Monastir, which holds 40, 50,000 people, brand new, modern, incredibly beautiful stadium. They have their own training ground, they have their own academy, and they're really signing, like they could sign Yusuf Baleli from a European club. They're one of those teams that can bring in players and give them perhaps not $1 million a year like Al Ahly was doing, but maybe 700,000, $800,000 per year. Um, and the proof is in the pudding. They lost Yusuf Belaili from last season, but they bring in Andy Delors. Well, he was playing in Qatar, but still, Andy Delors 3 years ago was one of the best strikers in the French league. You know, so they won the league for the first time since 2009 last season. They have Patrice Baumel as a coach, who I believe he was an assistant of Hervé Renard at Cote d'Ivoire, and then he was the Cote d'Ivoire national team coach himself, and he did a fantastic job last year with MC of Algiers. You could see that he bought into the club, he bought into the culture. It's the oldest club in Algeria. They have the most supporters in Algeria, and he just threw himself in. He converted to Islam. I think he got married to an Algerian woman, and he's really been adopted by the club. They don't call him Patrice Baumel, they call him Amir Baumel. That's his new chosen name, religious name. And yeah, so he fits like a glove. Yes, they lost Youssef Belaili, but like I said, they bring in Andy Delors, they bring in Amin Messoussa, an under 19 French international from Lille, who has looked decent so far. They raided the biggest rival, CR Belouizdad, for Akram Bourras, one of the best young midfielders in Algeria. The Ivorian midfielder they have, Mohamed Zougrana, in my opinion, one of the best midfielders in Africa, will be in Europe, I think, as early as next year. I was surprised he didn't go this summer. He is fantastic. Trying to think of who to compare him to. Actually, probably one of the names that comes to mind is Lamine Camara from Senegal and from Monaco. Even though he's probably younger than Mohamed Zougrana, but that kind of player where he's not that tall, kind of short, but technically proficient, uh, can play all over the pitch, does nothing wrong, only does things right. One challenge for them is that they're going to be placed into pot 3 or 4 because they're newcomers. They haven't played in this competition for more than a decade. So because they're going to pot 3 or 4, they will be facing, a lot of big clubs. And I think big clubs will be wary of them. They don't want them to fall in their group. They'd rather face like a Maniama or a Joliba from Mali, even though those teams are very respectable. But Mouloudia of Algiers, because of their stadium, because of the atmosphere they're going to generate, I think big clubs are going to be very wary of being drawn with them in their group. So yeah, that's a club that I think everybody's going to start noticing and realizing that these guys are serious. This could be the club. In Africa we have 4 top clubs recently. Yeah, Mamelodi Sundowns, Esperance de Tunis, Wydad Casablanca, and El Ahly. Of course, you also have Zamalek, you also have Raja, you also have many other top clubs. But those are the top four clubs that have been in the semifinals the most over the last 5 years. I think Algeria, even politically, I think they wanted a club amongst those top four. And I think what the state has done, because the state was the one that built the stadium, I think they said, okay, you know what? You guys are going to be our club. You're the oldest club. You have the most supporters. You have the biggest budget, etc. Go spend the money. I think that's what they've been doing over the last 2 years. So I think if you don't know this club, get used to them because you're going to be seeing them in the Champions League very often, I think, over the next decade or so. Finally, we're going to wrap up this video by speaking about Raja Casablanca. So the first thing about Raja is that they're not playing in Mohammed V Stadium. I was at a match in Mohammed V Stadium where Wydad Casablanca was playing in the CAF Champions League final. It is such a big advantage when those Casablanca clubs are playing there. The best atmosphere that I've witnessed in African football, and that's saying something because I've witnessed some very good atmospheres in Algeria and Tunisia and Egypt and so on and so forth. But the amount of noise that was coming out of that stadium nonstop, it seemed like every single of the 60,000 didn't stop singing and they knew every single lyric to every single song. Every single member of the 60,000 in the stands was whistling when their own club didn't have the ball. I haven't seen an atmosphere like that than it was when Wydad Casablanca beat Al Ahly in 2022 at the CAF Champions League final. Um, so they're not playing in Stade Mohammed V, they're playing in Stade Al Arabi Zawli because Mohammed V Stadium is being renovated for the AFCON. Will that have an impact? That's one thing that I'm hesitant about and why I didn't want to include them in this category of possible surprises. They also don't have the same coach. Yusuf Zinbauer was there last year. He won the league. Sorry, he didn't win the league with them, but he was very, very impressive. Um, or did he win the league? I'm not sure if them or Asfar won the league. I think it was. Thought it was Asfar, but maybe Raja mounted a late comeback. But I know they won the Throne Cup. But he left over the summer, and their president, I think his name is Mohamed Boudrika, was also arrested abroad on a Moroccan arrest warrant, and so he's been replaced. So they don't have the same coach and they don't have the same president. That's a little bit, iffy. Their best striker, in my opinion, one of the best Moroccan strikers, is Mahdi Mawhoub, a player that I watched for the first time when he was 15 years old in Algiers at the 2018 African Youth Games. So I always have like a affinity for him, because I watched that kid when he was 15, and I swear to God, in my mind, I was like, this kid's gonna be something. He also left. He's playing his ball now. I believe Dinamo Moscow in Eastern Europe. So they don't have that striker, and I don't think they replaced him well. But I really love their attacking midfield. Their wingers, Yossi Bouzouk, Raja's best player last year, probably the best player in the Moroccan league. He's Algerian, but he plays on the left wing. Very good dribbler, can provide the final pass, scores a lot of penalties. Very, very good player. Naufel Zarhouni on the opposite wing, also very good. Adam and Nafati pulling the strings from midfield is the sort of creative number 10. You have fantastic fullbacks, Bel Amri and Belaksout, very experienced, have played lots of matches, have played for either the Moroccan senior national team or the local team at the African Nations Championship. They've also been very important during qualifying, either scoring or assisting. I think they did some good recruiting in central midfield. They brought a lot of African players from around the continent, whether it's Frederic Bikoro from Central African Republic, Yasser Balde, I believe from is he from? He's not from Guinea-Bissau, is he? I believe I forget where he's from. And Amadou Kamara, I believe he's from Guinea. He's only 21 years old. Another very, very good midfielder. So they have strength in midfield. For me, that is their strength, and their fullbacks as well. I'm just not sure about their depth. I think they have a good starting 11, and these are all players. I think that even if you follow African football, you might not have heard of these names. As good as they are, a player like Yusuf Bouzouk, as good as he is, maybe you haven't heard of him. And I think that's why they're going to be underrated, and that's why they could surprise people this year. But the questions are new coach, new president, not in Mohammed V Stadium, and I have questions about the depth. Past that starting 11, when you talk about player number 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, are they at the same level as that starting 11? Me personally, I don't even know. I'm not saying they aren't, I'm saying I don't know. I haven't watched enough Raja to make that assumption. So that's why I'm hesitant about Raja Casablanca, but because the strength of their midfield, because the fullbacks are so good, because even though they're playing in Stade Arabi Zauli, that's still, like a really great atmosphere in Casablanca. And because the quality of their midfield, I really do think they could surprise people. If you watch the highlights of the qualifying for the Champions League, they played against Samartex from Ghana. You'll see that in their attacking moves, they had the best combination play of any club that I've watched out of the Champions League qualifiers. Their attacking opportunities always came from like beautifully constructed moves of 6, 7, 8 passes. And so as a result, I think they're going to play some of the best football. They just need to make sure they when they get the chance, they knock those goals in. I don't know who the striker is going to be, but they need to knock those goals in, not just create a bunch of opportunities. And yeah, probably avoid injuries because I'm not sure about the depth. But those are my two clubs that I think could surprise people. Mouloudia of Algiers, because they haven't been there, people don't know who they are, and Raja of Casablanca. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this episode. To recap, favorites, El Ahly and Espresso Tunis. Question mark, Mamelodi Sundowns and TP Mazembe. Possible surprises, Mouloudia of Algiers and Raja Athletic Club of Casablanca. Thank you for listening. Rambled on and on and on. No guest host this week. I think by next week we're going to be back to guest hosting. If you've enjoyed this episode, please give it a thumbs up on YouTube. Please comment on YouTube. Please subscribe on YouTube. That's if you want to see my face. If you don't want to see my face, go to the audio platforms. Go to Spotify, go to Apple Podcasts, go to wherever you get your podcasts. Do leave a 5-star review. I would really, really appreciate that. Leave a comment if you can too. I would appreciate that as well. It really helps us out. And yeah, we'll speak to you next week, recapping probably. Actually, next week I think we're going to preview. We're going to preview the international window probably. All right, take care. Signing off, Meher Mizahi for the African Five-a-Side podcast. Take care.